Welcome back to another episode of Remember Who You Are, a soul healing.
Remembering me.
Oh, golly.
You crossing the streams already.
Welcome to another episode of Remembering Me, a soul healing podcast. I am Candace Love.
I am Brick City Buddha, also known as Docs.
And this is episode what?
Number 9. 9 of them things.
9 of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Slut.
Yeah, so what has, we should give them a update on something before we even get to, our topics. What can we update people on? What
you did last night?
No. No.
Can they hear that?
What we did last night? We
I know what you did last summer.
We read.
Don't lie to these people.
We watched TV.
Mm-hmm.
We watched a battle.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Easy the Black Captain.
Shout out my brother Easy, man. Love you, bro.
We rewatched that battle because we just had to see him win one more time.
Mm-hmm. You deflecting though.
Oh.
They don't need to know all that.
Yeah,
they can imagine.
We watched the battle.
But update wise, you got a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
And we do want to address a few things that came up from our last episode. Shout out to everybody that's been supporting. There was a lot of feedback based on our blended family episode because regardless of what we say that could be relatable, everybody got family. And most of us are in some type of a blended or nuclear family like we talked about last week. So it's been a lot of perspectives that have come. And one of the things we want to start this episode with is addressing just the dynamics of being able to speak your truth. So this young lady has a book coming, which she just tried to rename our podcast by a few seconds ago. She got the book. Give them the title.
The title of the book is Remember Who the F You Are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I named it that because as I began my own healing journey, most of the time when we heal is the part of our healing is us remembering who we are. And what happens is as we become human, as we journey into life, we forget. We forget our power. We forget who we are. We forget our purpose. And we spend the rest of our life kind of aimlessly being this one being and trying to heal, trying to grow, trying to evolve instead of just remembering that is who I am at the core of my being. My soul is already equipped with everything that it needs for me to be the fullness of my being, to show up big, to embody myself, to embody my power. And so in the book, everything is designed to help a person remember who they are so they no longer have to use outside sources to empower themselves.
All right, so let me preface that you're about to hear first time you've ever read an excerpt from this book. You haven't posted anything yet, right?
No, I haven't shared anything.
All right, so it's apropos because we talked about speaking about some of the feedback that has come back, mostly positive, but in anything you do publicly, not everybody's going to see things the same way, and we completely comfortable with that. If you talk crazy, we're going to talk crazy back to you, but we're going to leave it at that, right? So it was some feedback I got on Facebook. And this is some of the stuff I used to deal with, especially coming into this relationship, kind of hiding my desire to speak my truth to not offend people. And one of the things was that some people was saying that it should have been all perspectives involved. First of all, this is our podcast, right?
Right.
And second of all, if people who may have had those perspectives actually watched the episode, which they probably didn't, no shade. We in a very fast-paced society where people just watch a clip and they think that's all there is. So we were very balanced in our discussion.
Yeah,
we were very
absolutely.
fair. And like I was telling that person and went on to put up a post on Facebook, a few different things can be true. You can simultaneously speak on the pain that somebody has caused you. You can simultaneously acknowledge what that pain has done for your journey and why you're grateful for it. And you can still perceive that person as a beautiful person that just happened to have an experience with you where it caused you grief, where it caused you suffering. All those different things are allowed, especially when it comes down to the fact this is your story. You own this story, you own these experiences, and a lot of times people don't get the downloads that are necessary from being able to speak on their story, because every time you speak on it, you get more and more scope of what was actually happening in those moments. The podcast we did, I learned a lot from watching it back that I hadn't realized going into the podcast. So it's not just a matter of telling all your business. It's pretty much training for your spirit to be able to open up advanced placement levels of a certain experience as opposed to just the standard. So being okay with, regardless of how anybody feels about you telling your story, is something that you have helped me to develop. And I no longer hide it. I no longer worry about the fact that some people are going to hear me talk about a previous relationship who are friends or family of that person and want to run back, or you shouldn't. I'm going to do what I want because this is my experience. I own it. So you actually have an excerpt kind of talking about this aspect, right?
And so before I read that, I just want to say, you know, when someone shares their story and someone responds, well, what's the other person's perspective? You know, what would they say? I think that's very emotionally irresponsible and is very emotionally dismissive and belittling. Because when I'm telling my story or when you're telling your story, don't nobody else's story matter.
Right.
And that's just the bottom line to it. And so we have to be very respectful of when a person shares what their experience is, because how you feel is valid. What if you just told me something hurt your feelings and I'm like, well, let me get the other person's side first before I acknowledge why your feelings were hurt.
Right.
That is very unfair to the fact that the bottom line is your feelings are hurt. And so we don't want to dismiss another person's story. And on top of that, I have ownership and sovereignty over my story. And nobody else's story matters outside of that. If another person wants to share their story on their own time, and they can do that. I may look like a villain in their story, but their story doesn't matter to me. I have to own my story because it is the foundation of my healing, my growth, and my evolving.
Right.
And so when we hear people tell their stories, if you don't have the capacity to hold space for a person telling their story, don't listen.
Exactly.
That's just the bottom line to it.
Exactly.
People have to have safe spaces to be able to share. And you have to also understand that there is a lot of healing that comes when a person finally has the ability to share what they've experienced and what they've gone through. And so how I always know a person is triggered is when they say stupid stuff like that. And it's a lot of them under the comments on Instagram. I always know a person is triggered. And it also goes back to perception. There's hundreds of people that have commented and like, oh my God, this is exactly what I experienced. Thank you so much for telling your story. And then there's like 5 that's like, well, what about the other person's side? Which means that you feel like you're the other person, which probably means you was probably showing your behind in your blended family relationship. And you resonate more with the person that was also acting a fool. Okay. And so we have to understand when you are triggered, and when your triggers are not allowing you to hold space for somebody while we're sharing. That's just the bottom line to it. People are allowed to tell their stories. And the way that I start my script off is tell your stories. You are allowed to embody your story. You are allowed to embody your experience. If a person wanted you to speak nicely or warmly about them, then you should have treated them better.
Bars.
Period. So it's not your job to tell your story and tiptoe over how another person may feel about it. You tell your story, and that's just the bottom line to it. So I'm going to read y'all what I wrote. And this is in my book, Remember Who the F You Are. And it is entitled, Tell Your Stories. It says, embody your life story and tell it from your heart. If people wanted you to speak nicely about them in your stories, they should have treated you better. Have you fully embodied your story, your life experiences, and what has happened to you or for you? Have you ever told your life story or stories that have made you who you are today? Or are you someone who has allowed fear, lack of confidence, shame, guilt, and anger hinder you from owning what is yours to tell? So often people want to speak up. They want to share their experiences with the world because deep down they know what they've experienced could help someone going through the same thing. Or they just want to release the untold stories that have been holding them hostage for years. So many are silenced out of fear of sharing their own experiences. But a person takes their power back when they choose to own the details that created the person that they are today. You can't embody and honor the truth of your story while simultaneously walking on eggshells, attempting not to upset someone who played a part in your journey. When you allow fear to hinder you from owning the totality of your journey, you rob yourself of your power and silence the very parts of your being that are begging to be set free. Standing up for yourself, speaking up for yourself, setting healthy boundaries, and embodying your power all start with strengthening your throat chakra, using your voice, and reflecting on the root of when you were first silenced. People need to hear your unique story. They need to hear your advice. They need to hear your voice say specific things that will unlock their potential to grow, heal, evolve, and embody their voices as well. The one thing that cannot be replicated is your personal life story. Fear has kept so many from sharing their stories, holding their lessons captive, and hiding them from others, simultaneously robbing others from words that could potentially change their lives, give them healthier perspectives, help them find gratitude, laugh for the first time in a long time, or heal damaged parts of their spirit that they aren't even aware of. When we tell our stories, we get to see how much alike we all are, how connected we are, and how much we share so many of the exact same experiences. When we hear other people tell their stories, our spirits start to connect on a deeper level, and this opens the heart to learn more compassion, patience, and understanding. When we tell our stories, it gives others the confidence to come out of their own shadows, to embody the power attached to their story, and to stand firm in who they are and what they have experienced. When you own your story, you take your power back. Remember who the F you are. And then the last part is tell your stories and own your truth. If people wanted you to speak nicely about them, then they should have treated you better. When we recover loudly, we keep others from dying slowly.
Sheesh. Can we get a round of applause around the world right now for the first excerpt?
The first excerpt. No one's ever read that part either, so this is a first.
And there's a lot of dynamics there. As you were talking about the throat chakra aspect, and we actually did get a few requests to do some breath exercises.
Nice.
So I think this is a good point before I dive into what you actually talked about. And this is a technique that I got from my initiator, Honors English. His initiator, Baba Kamu, I believe is his name. But I had went to a retreat where he was teaching us various things. And this is something called yogic breath, or his style of yogic breath. And if y'all want to do this with me real quick, this can clear out some of the debris that a lot of times get stuck in your throat chakra. If you're talking about the spirit science of the throat chakra, we call it Vishuddhi. That's the Sanskrit word, but it's pretty much your healing center. And when I always say, when I first started to understand the chakras, it's all right, why wouldn't the heart be the healing center? Mm-hmm. But think about all the different things that happen in the throat. Get your mind out the gutter. But, right, just swallowing, right? Eating, speaking, breathing, all these different parameters that have a huge impact on us just being able to have the human experience. So when you don't speak your truth, the analogy I always use, if somebody got a booger in their nose on the train across from you, and you want to tell them and you don't, think about what that feels like in your body. There's literally resistance because your energy body knows this needs to come out. And if it does, it's antidote for you and for that person. Every time you speak your truth, your throat chakra muscle strengthens, and that person receives the information that they're supposed to receive from you specifically. Right. When you don't let it out, that nectar, that antidote, turns into poison. And this is why it feels like when that truth is going back down into the system and that energy of the truth is realizing we're not going to get out right now, it literally starts to bleed into the system in a way where it don't feel good. It feels restrictive. You literally, your emotional body starts to go down. So this is a technique that helps to clear the debris of all those small and big moments where you didn't say what you were supposed to say that have now been collected in the throat chakra and are now blocking it. So if you were somebody that started your spiritual journey today and you do all this extracurricular work, but you haven't dumped out what you were supposed to say at 5 years old, what you were supposed to say at 10 or 15, then that effort is not going to have its best chance of really clarifying and purifying the system. We got to clear out the debris. So once again, this is yogic breath. Shout out to Baba Kamu. So you're going to sit with your spine straight. We got a special guest today. Cleo, go sit down, please.
And we said she was going to be in this episode. Cleo, go.
Go sit down.
Go sit down. Go sit down.
Off. Good job. Not right now. Okay. So yogic breathing. You're going to use your imagination. Of course, we're going to be manipulating and directing the breath. So once the spine is nice and straight, the main area of focus, of course, is going to be the throat chakra and the lungs. When we take an inhale, you're going to imagine your throat area almost like those fan belts. If you ever seen like a warehouse, and in the windows, they got those big fans that kind of filtrate like dusty air out of it. Mm-hmm. You're going to imagine your throat chakra or your throat area is like one of those fan belts. And as you're breathing in, you imagine a fan belt sucking the air, the energy, the oxygen from the bottom of the lungs. You feeling that fan belt going energetically at the throat and pulling up all the oxygen and energy into your throat. Once you get it there, you're just going to hold it for 8 seconds. Right? When we breathe out, you're going to exhale, feel that fan belt kick up, and now it's blowing back down the energy and the oxygen to the bottom of the lungs again. And again, the lungs store grief, sadness, depression. We know what the throat chakra is for. So this clears out a lot of the different blockages. I'm only going to do 1 round, but if you was to do this by yourself, you do 5 where you're breathing up and holding. And in the latter 5, you breathe down and hold it at the bottom of the lungs. I'm going to just do 1 when we breathe up. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
All right, so spine nice and straight. Go ahead and close your eyes if you can. I know a lot of y'all may be driving, but when you can, get us a shot. So when I count us down from 3, we're going to take a smooth, slow, full breath in via the nostrils, and you're going to imagine, visualize, sense, and feel that throat chakra fan belt bringing all that oxygen from the bottom of the lungs into it. In 3, 2, 1, big, smooth, slow breath up. Feel your fan belt, pull it up. All that oxygen coming through the lungs. And once it gets in the throat, fan belt stops and you hold it for an 8 count. Keep your attention in the throat. Of course, the oxygen is being held in the throat. And then 4, 3, 2, fan belt kicks on and pushes it back down. Feeling that energy slide down the lungs to the bottom of the lungs and then hold it at the bottom of the lungs. 8 count. 4, 3, 2, 1. Now you can breathe normally. If you was to actually do the technique, you do that process for 5 times. And then the opposite, you go down, hold it at the bottom of the lungs and go back up 5 times. That's one of the many techniques that can kind of help clear out the debris beyond just doing the journaling, beyond just telling your story on the podcast. You got to actually get to the energy that's there. That's one of the techniques. So that's our breathing for today.
Yeah, I love that.
Go ahead. You want to say something?
I want to say one thing, actually 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
First thing, please go pre-order my book. It is available.
I was going to say that before you start reading.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's on my website, candicelove.com. You can also find the link on my Instagram account. Please go pre-order. The last point is I don't care who it is. I don't care what they say. I don't care how angry they are. I don't care how upset or how hurt. You are allowed to tell your story. And you don't allow anybody to rob you from that process. If you have to figure out the emotions or of the backlash that you'll get, you do that after the fact.
Exactly.
But in the moment, your story is your story, and nobody has permission to fear you out of telling your story. And it's very necessary that people tell their stories, because when you use, just like you just said, when you use that energy, when you release it from the body, if you don't speak it, where does that energy get stored? It gets stored in the body. And then when you have energy stored in the body, that transmutes into cancer, disease, issues in the body, all types of aches and pains. It becomes trauma. So the way that you release that trauma out of the body is you have to use your voice, you use your words. So you never allow anybody to rob you of your own process.
One thing I'm gonna say too, I'm also launching my meditation YouTube page. My first one will be up by the time you guys see this, so shameless plug for me as well.
Facts.
But with that being said,
Oh wait, no, we're not gonna just brush over that.
go ahead. Do your
Every
thing. Come on,
Sunday,
Don King.
you know I gotta advocate for my boy, for my boy. Every Sunday, is it gonna be called Sundays with Source?
Probably will. The series will probably be called
The
Sundays
series.
with Source. Yeah.
So every Sunday, his meditation will be uploaded to his YouTube, which is
It was Brick City Buddha, the same as my Instagram, Brick_CITI_BUDDHA.
so that's where you'll watch the meditations every Sunday, but they will also be uploaded to our podcast. So is that something you want to do?
Yeah, I'm with it.
Yeah, so
with it.
that way, because a lot of you said how you enjoyed the breath work that he does. You enjoy like those quick moments of meditation. So we can upload that to YouTube and as well as here, so you guys have a clear idea of what's happening, and that can come every Sunday. So make sure if you want to go deeper into your meditative practices, that you hit him up for one-on-one sessions so you can learn how to do these things on your own. It's very beautiful when you have someone guiding you, but he's guiding you so you can learn how to do these things on your own as well. And so you need to book a one-on-one session with him so he can give you the ins and outs of how those things happen and work.
Thank you, baby.
Of course.
So with that being said, if you are afraid of speaking your truth based on what somebody else is going to think, especially if it was a previous partner, friend, business partner, whatever it is, they got more sovereignty over your life than you do. They have more dictation and say in what you allow to happen in your life than you do. And when I started to realize this, you know, both of us, we have kind of used social media as our diaries. Before we even knew that's what we was doing, we just needed platforms to be able to get it out. I didn't have people who understood what I was going through.
Right.
I didn't know you yet, and it was the same situation for you. So for you, it was nature, it was meditation. For me, and all these different things, that's how we got to communicate. But there is still something to the written scribe or however you go about
Absolutely.
that. So for me, it wasn't about how people a lot of times perceive it as, why are you putting your business on social media? Like, nobody wants to hear that on Facebook, especially Facebook at that time. If it wasn't just ratchet or sensational stuff that what my page used to be about, nobody wanted to hear it. But I wasn't putting it out there for them. I was just starting to learn. Getting it out of my system is helping to a certain degree. Had I not started to understand that, regardless of how somebody felt about my perspective of our experience, had I not started to create that groundwork, I don't have the foundation built as far as an audience that was now resonating with my quote unquote antidote that was coming through my truth, that got me to the point where I started to realize my purpose, understand what I was supposed to do in this life cycle, make my way to you, and us now putting our purposes together. None of that happens without some of those Facebook posts that people was telling me this not the place for this. None of that happens without me getting comfortable. And that's the thing too. The more you start to do this, you take your sovereignty and your control back, you build your muscle. You start to work out that muscle of, like we've spoken about in the past, being okay being a villain. And the other half of telling your story, you also got to be comfortable with whoever has a different perspective of that same experience. You got to be comfortable with them saying whatever they wanted to do. If my son's mother wanted to write a tell-all book or whatever it was, she has the opportunity to do that. People used to bring information to me about some of the things that was being said about me, and not necessarily just from her, but just at large. It wasn't my battle to fight. Everybody is going to see a singular situation and experience 8 billion different ways on this planet. 8 billion people, everybody's going to see the same thing a different way.
Perception.
A different nuance.
Yes.
So you build your muscle the more you communicate what you got on your heart with tolerance and acceptance and non-attachment. One of the niyamas in yoga. Yoga is a system. It's a science. It's different compartments of it. But one of the main precepts is about not being attached to anything outside of you. I can't control nobody else's opinion. I no longer need to, but I don't get to that point without practicing and working out that muscle of just starting to say what I got to say when I got to say it, regardless of who feel a way about it.
Yeah, and the other aspect of like the transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that people don't recognize is we were able to grow our platforms based on our transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is because people see themselves in our stories.
Right.
And that does make a lot of people uncomfortable, because to a certain degree, when you tell your story, you're also calling out the fact that they're too fearful to tell theirs. So it is triggering to many people.
Facts.
And you'll get to see that when other people are triggered by you telling your story and you being transparent about what's happened with you, it's an indication that they don't feel safe enough to do that. They don't feel safe enough to speak their truth. They don't feel safe enough with looking like the villain. They don't feel safe enough to not upset another person or make another person angry. Typically, people are only used to a person sharing and divulging their story when they're angry.
Exactly.
So it's like, oh no, you made me mad.
Right,
so now I'm about to tell the truth.
Right.
As opposed to, it's like, actually, I'm not mad at all. I'm just telling my story because it's mine to tell. Why do I have to be angry? Why do I have to be spiteful? Why do I have to have some negative underlying reason for me to tell my story? I'm not even trying to air you out or make you look bad. I'm just telling what happened with me, and you just kind of happen to look bad in the process, but that wasn't my intention.
Right.
And so you get to see that when you tell your story, it triggers other people because they haven't gotten to that space yet.
Right.
And that's still not an indication for you to stop, to not tell your story and be transparent, because we have made a living off of being able to allow people to see themselves in our story, because it reminds people that they are not by themselves. And even when I have clients and I'm like, I ask them, did you ever tell your mom how it made you feel that she abandoned you? And they're like, no, I don't even want to talk about that. Did you ever tell your dad how it made you feel when he wasn't present? Did you ever tell your sister how it made you feel that she would bully you all the time growing up? And the average person that is my client will say, no, I never said anything. I understand what they went through when they were younger. Exactly. I understand why they did this. I understand why they did that. And so to a large degree, I have to tell them, they're not even here.
Right.
Why are you protecting them? They're not even present with you in our session. Why do you still not have the ability to just speak your truth? Why can't you just say, yes, my dad abandoned me, and I also love him, and it hurts me to acknowledge that. That's three truths that can exist at the same time. That your dad wasn't a bad person, that he did show up the best he could, that he wasn't there, that you did download that as being abandoned, and also that you love him and you don't want to see him in that light.
Right.
Why can't you acknowledge the full totality of your story without dismissing a part of your story just to protect another person?
Exactly.
And when you do that, you disregard the inner child and all of the versions of your being that need to be heard, that need to express, no, that did bother me. No, I did feel abandoned. So when you just move straight to protecting somebody, you don't have the opportunity to release all of the trauma that's being stored in your being.
And part of the protection we want to provide actually comes when the truth does come out. And if that other person does feel a way about it, but now they have a mirror held up where they no longer have to have a blind spot to what they may not have seen and why they even hurt you in the first place. So if you really want to provide protection and still give that person love, don't hide the story. Say what you got to say. And if it makes it back to them, now they have their reflection coming back to them via your perspective of the experience. The other thing too is, I say this to a lot of my students, especially those that want to become practitioners themselves. We just had our last session with our group for this particular juncture of YME, yoga, meditation, emotional alchemy, teacher certification training that we do with Afro Yoga Queen. But we pretty much at the end, we got graduation tomorrow. So last week was our last session together. And I was just giving them tips for, how to move as a practitioner. And one of the things I told them is that no one message is for everybody. Every message is for somebody, right? And a lot of times we kind of deem, well, if I'm going to tell this, who's going to hear me? It may not be 100 people at first. It may not be 1,000 or 1,000,000. Maybe one person needed that message. As long as you're honoring your role and your purpose and being that part of the universe, that conduit to give it to them, then that audience will continue to expand. So every time we have told our truth, we was literally casting out the net into the grid of humanity, and those people that do resonate, that are like-minded and like spirit, with us, now they can start to resonate and vibrate towards us. Now we got these huge communities of people who do kind of feel where we coming from. It's probably still a lot of people that don't, but they have kind of almost been filtered out because we've spoken our truth, casted our net so many times that the connections, the resources, the attendees for classes and retreats, and the people that's going to buy the book and SASHA flowers and the skincare, now they're here because we didn't half-ass any point where the universe was asking us say that. Regardless of what's going to come from it, cast the net. Me casting the net 8 years ago, I just put up on my story a picture of like me first getting into meditation and everything I was going through. Me casting those nets 8 years ago turned into what would be perceived as the business plan now. This wasn't no business plan. This was me just speaking my truth, whatever was going on in the moment. So if you feel like, tribe vibes, everybody talking about trying to find their tribe and people pay a lot of money to be able to do that, that's cool. Start speaking your truth. Those people will show up in your life.
Yeah, and I also want to talk about the fact that speaking your truth also isn't just about how another person plays a part in your story. Speaking your truth is also acknowledging, like, I feel really insecure right now. A lot of my posts on my page when I'm speaking my truth, most of them are not about another person.
Right.
Most of them are about what I'm experiencing and what I'm going through, because it gives me the opportunity to get it out of my system.
Right.
I don't want to hold it.
Exactly.
There's no point in me. Who am I holding this in for?
Right.
If I'm like, if I'm saying like, oh, I'm insecure about my skin today, why can't I say that?
Right.
Who am I trying to prove that everything is perfect to? And I'm not. If I'm insecure about my skin, me and my husband made the video that went viral, and what was it? Tattoo your heart.
Tattoo your heart, yeah.
Right. And so he was, trying to ask me, what was going on, what was I feeling, and I was feeling very insecure about my skin. I made sure I shared that in the caption. I also make sure that I share that most of the time it's a reflection of the fact that my eating has been unbalanced. That's just a part of me telling my story. I'm not holding on to it. I don't want to hold any aspect of my journey or my being hostage. If another person is too fearful to tell their story, then say that.
Right.
Say that. If you're just too scared to, because most of the time when people tell the truth of their story, they also got to acknowledge how they showed up.
Right.
And most of the time people don't want to acknowledge how they showed up because it is going to make them look a certain type of way. So they don't tell the totality of their story. But then you have people who are passionate about taking self-accountability. So not only do they acknowledge their story, they have no issue with acknowledging I didn't show up my best in that.
Right.
Because they understand that holding that within their being really makes them feel heavy, trapped. And most of the time, a lot of the weight that y'all are holding on to in your bodies ain't even physical weight. It's the weight of all the stories that you refuse to tell, that you're too afraid to tell. Right? A lot of people who've experienced being molested by family members won't even express that, and it's showing up in your body, and you feel heavy because you won't give yourself permission to be weightless. You won't give yourself permission to share the things that need to be shared so you can finally be weightless and free enough to fly and expand your frequency.
Right. And we'll call in that type of scenario where the weight, right, we'll call the actual disease obesity or something like that. The disease started as not telling your truth. Right. And it developed into the physical expression of you holding on to that energy. Perfect. So when you understand the word disease, this meaning lack, ease, of course we know what that means. Every moment you are out of easiness, you are out of your natural state. You get better when you speak your truth, when you get these things out, when you start to direct your attention towards yourself. You no longer going to have the ability to hold something that crazy because it feels so palpable and tangible in your system. Maybe 10 years ago, the things that I talk about now, I could have held on to them. Now, as soon as my true north drifts to the left 1 degree and I'm a little bit out of easiness, even if I don't know what it's about yet, that got to be addressed. So when you start to understand that I can't afford to be out of my natural state. And if me speaking this truth is going to bring me back to my pH balance, if it's going to bring me back to that 7, to that middle point, that Wu way, that's what I got to do regardless of who feels a way about it. So there's so much value in just saying what you got to say, regardless of what it's about. And there's been times where I never speak bad about people. Even in me referencing things about my previous relationship, it's always with a certain level of balance, respect, and there's a difference between saying that somebody hurt you and tearing them down. I've never
Right.
torn anybody down. But even in me addressing my truth about some of the things somebody else may have done to me, it's actually led me to some of my own self-accountability that I wouldn't have seen had I been processing this just by talking, doing a live, writing things out, making a song. It's like, oh snap, I ain't even realized that until right now. The first live you saw me do, when the algorithm shouldn't have even had our pages collide,
Right.
was Women Aren't Built for Monogamy. At that time, I had a way smaller platform. At that time, that was the biggest live I had ever did, and I was just vetting in real time on the live the things I was learning from, at that point, the pretty recent separation from my son's mother. And I was realizing in that title, Women Aren't Built for Monogamy, it's not like y'all can't be faithful. I was realizing that a lot of times men have this thing where no matter what I do, I can't make her happy. And I was starting to realize the nature of feminine energy is to consistently and constantly consume new, right? So I was realizing that I was being too forceful, not connecting enough to my feminine principle to understand it's not my job to make anybody understand how good a man I am. It was self-accountability, but somebody sees that title here, I'm talking about my son's mother. Oh, he just tearing her down. These are some of the things that become available when you get to that point where it don't matter what nobody think. You just got to get it out.
Yeah, facts. You just going to have to tell your story,
Facts.
because some people, those that mind don't matter, and
Exactly.
those that matter don't mind.
Exactly.
And everybody's radio ain't got the best frequency. Okay, so everybody don't matter. You're gonna be the villain in some people's story.
Right.
Let them have it. I remember when I was getting my breast reduction.
Right.
I hadn't spoken about getting my breast reduction yet, but I was already taking like photos.
Right.
Cute photos. I had on like a cute dress. I had been waiting 5 years to finally fit in this dress. And so I went out with my friends to a dinner, and I took pictures in my dress. And like, I think the next day I had like a message in my inbox that was like, I'm going to expose you. You're telling people to heal, grow, and evolve, but you're not telling them that you just got surgery. And I already had the video clipped up with my surgeon sharing the fullness of my experience in the hospital bed, crying and just being excited about my process. So also what happens is when you don't tell your story, you give other people the opportunity to use it, and tell it for you and use it against you.
Facts.
So I didn't even have to respond to that, because I'm like, I can't wait to share my story.
Right, no doubt.
Like, even when I acknowledged how I was addicted to alcohol for all those years, and now I'm almost 5 years sober this month, I'm not hiding the fact that I was addicted to alcohol. Some people are afraid to admit that, and then that fear gives other people the opportunity to tell their stories for them or use it against them. You take your power back when you show up, regardless of how people feel about it, because it's yours to tell.
Absolutely. So I guess that's a good segue, and we're going to kind of bounce around a little bit on this particular episode. It's still pretty much in alignment, but this leads us nicely into the first aspect. I guess the phrase I'm going to use for it is like, soul polyamory, right? Or soul polygamy, soul polyandry, whatever you want to call it. But the integration process, I was working with a client this week. I also had a moment where I was able to practice the spiritual integrity Candace often talks about, where if you are a practitioner and you got a client book and you're not feeling in the best space, that client needs to at least attempt to be rebooked. So I had a moment where a lot was going on for me emotionally. I have an emotional alchemist as my wife, so she was able to help guide me through it. But when I got, and I'll talk about some of that too in a minute, but when I got to the actual session the next day after I had cleared myself, one of the things she was talking about that her therapist was suggesting, and no shade to her therapist or anybody that has this approach, that approach is valuable for certain people depending on where they at. It's all part of the puzzle. But we also realize at this point that we aren't looking to close chapters. We are looking to integrate every aspect of our being. And I was able to relay that to her the day after a lot of emotion, a lot of inadequacy about docs, about this version of myself was coming up. It was a lot of things that Candace was just talking me through. And it finally got to the point where she pulled out a notebook and she was like, mind you, she's working on remember WTF you are. She's like, we about to do your remember who you are list right now. I'm about to put the first one here and you about to go off on how great a man you are, right? And it was just, I tried to pick up the pen. I'm still talking through what I'm processing. I'm figuring out what's here in real time as she's asking me questions. And I couldn't write nothing on that list. So at a certain point, she was like, well, maybe the list is not what's meant. Maybe you just supposed to talk to these versions of yourselves that you may have been leaving out. And I sat with that for a second. She gave me some space. She went outside and I went right behind where I'm at right now on my throne, took out the notebook and literally wrote a 6-7 page letter to myself. So when you hear something like that, if you've never done this, that's going to sound weird, like writing to yourself. What does that look like? I kind of just let the pen, the energy of my previous selves that was really crying out to me in that moment and trying to prepare this version of myself that is coming close to maxing out and what he was supposed to do. I feel him dying, this version of himself, of myself dying. I feel a new version of myself being born and breaking through the cocoon of who we know right now as Doc's Brick City Buddha. I don't know what's going to be on the other end of this version of myself, but I know to get to the point of clarity, I got to go spend time with the versions I've already been. So I took time to literally go through as many phases of my life. I think I got it around here somewhere, but it took 5 pages to dox the baby, right? Dox the 2-year-old that I hear didn't cry much, was just very observant. Dox the 5-year-old who was the becoming a star preacher. I went through all of these different versions of myself. And once I put that page down, I was able to have a certain level of solidarity and openness to the fact that we exist in a space of going beyond persona. That's big in today's society where so many beings are awakening. We want to transcend the ego. We want to get rid of the ego, go beyond the person. And there's something to be said for that. There's credence to that. But part of that process is about also integrating and remembering all these different versions, remembering all these different versions of yourself to just pay homage. I'm only going to be this dox that's in front of you for this podcast, for this split second of infinity.
Yeah.
Once we done, this is done. But that doesn't mean I have to forever neglect and not acknowledge that this version of myself had value, even though it's only going to exist for an hour and a half while we got on these gray shirts. He still 10 years down the line needs my attention, whatever version I will be at that point. So a lot of this process to be able to learn more about ourselves, to be able to share those stories, is about giving more attention and prioritization to integration.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that my clients really fight. And they fight it because it forces them to go back to their past selves. It forces them to go back to the past. And the average person is like, nah, I ain't trying to go back to the past. I'm trying to heal now and I'm trying to look forward. And what happens is the past has messages, lessons, and gems that you need to go back to retrieve so you can move forward, heal, grow, and evolve. Right. And even if you look at a timepiece movie and they're trying to figure out like a disaster that's happening right now in their present reality, and like the world's gonna end. Typically, what do? They time travel back to the past because there's a clue in their past that they did not see, that they looked over, and they have to go back to the past, find that clue. Most of the times they have to interact with a past version of themselves. They have to observe a past version of themselves, and that past version of themselves is the one that holds the clue that they need. And they take that information, they implement it into the present reality, and then the world no longer ends. And so what happens is, in our healing process, when we don't give ourselves permission to go back to the past, there's still versions of ourselves that are like, who's going to come back and save me? Who's going to tell me that because I was molested, it wasn't my fault? Right. Who's going to tell me that I wasn't dreaming, that did actually happen to me? Who's going to tell me that I am worthy, that I am loved, that I'm not a burden, that I am worthy of having someone be present for me? Who's going to reparent me? Right. And so to a certain degree, everyone has the love wound, which means that they weren't loved the way that they specifically needed to be loved when they were younger. And so when you get older, there's fragmented versions of our being that are still searching for that perfect love that you needed when you were growing up. And so our job is not to try to figure out how to heal, grow, and evolve, or feel better, happy, or at peace right now. We have to figure out, well, who is the one that feels so uneasy right now? Which version of myself is that? Which version of myself is the one that does not feel worthy? Which version of myself is the one that feels fearful and having new beginnings? Which version of myself is the one that does not feel worthy enough of succeeding and moving forward and doing great things? Which one is too fearful to embody their power and show up big and really show up in the world the way that the present you actually desires? Until we integrate these fragmented aspects of our being, we'll always have a younger version of ourselves sabotaging our present moment. So we have to go back to the versions of ourselves that still need nurturing, that still need our attention, that still need nourishment, that still need reparenting. Just because you done got older and you like, oh no, I understand why my dad didn't love me. It's because his dad didn't love him. That's why he couldn't be present for me. Your inner child don't understand that. The adult uses logic so they don't have to deal with the heaviness of the painfulness that comes with acknowledging emotions. So you have to go back and talk to that 10-year-old how a 10-year-old will understand. They don't understand just because his dad wasn't there for his dad, that's why he wasn't present. Kids don't understand that. They deal in the realm of emotion, which means that you have to allow a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old to feel. They have to feel the totality of their emotion. If your parents didn't have the ability to parent you when you were 10 years old, that means that that version of you is still present, and you have to go back and reparent that version of yourself. And that looks like writing. A lot of people really don't give writing the credit that they need.
Right.
I don't care how much you spend on a therapist, they're going to always tell you to take out a pen and some paper. Right. And they're going to tell you to write, because what you have stored in your body now has the ability to surface out of the body, the mind, and the spirit. And that looks like identifying the version of you that is trying to get your attention, the version of you that you've exiled. I speak about that a lot in my book. How many versions of yourself have you exiled? Have you forgotten about, that you've thrown away? People say all the time, oh, I need to kill the ego. I used to say that when I started my healing journey. And then one night I was sitting on my bed and I just broke down crying. Why would I want to kill a version of myself that may be misguided, but is doing its best to make me feel safe, doing its best to protect me? I don't want to kill any version of myself. I want to integrate all of the versions. Everybody gets to come. They may have to take a back seat, but every version of myself gets to come. I get to teach them healthier ways. I get to remind those younger versions, you don't have to show up in this way. You have healthier tools now. You don't have to resort to anger because you know how to express yourself, even in a firm way, to get somebody's attention. When we integrate all of the aspects of our being, all of the younger versions of ourselves, we get to show up in our present moment as a whole being, and no longer as a fragmented being.
And that's what yoga really is. Again, yoga means to yoke, to unify, in certain ways to integrate. And us being both counselors in our own different ways. I often express to my clients, especially the first time I work with them, that my approach is three-pronged. One of which, we got to address the mechanics of the mind, which most people never learn how to do. Of course, meditation is what I'm talking about.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you addressing the mechanics of the mind, this is why people don't want to go to the past.
Right.
Because they don't know how to go back there and not get stuck.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that prong, then you have the emotional side, knowing how to process in real time emotion. You got your emotional alchemist right here. The third piece is the retroactive process of picking up previous versions of yourself. And I have a technique that I do with my clients. I try to keep everything simple. I use pop culture references. So I have this thing called, the mental and emotional DeLorean, right? So if I'm working with a client and she's talking about how, her husband or her man has not been treating her right for a long time, but that woman is still there. She's still making a choice to accept that. we can't just address that particular present habit pattern. We got to go back to when it was first developed. So we'll hop in our mental DeLorean. I'll have them close their eyes and use the vehicle of attention to drive backwards, because where attention goes, energy flows. And as a counselor, I'm sure you hear a lot of times, I can't remember. It's a blank spot. I can't conjure that memory. They'll say that at first. Almost 9 times out of 10, when we start to do this process, they're like, I can't remember it. But again, if you continue to water that experience with directing your attention to it, it will start to open up to you. So if I drive you back, if I go back in the mental DeLorean and I'll have them go past one memory previous to before we started the session, remember that. Going back towards the morning, breakfast, and each memory you go past, the attention, the DeLorean picks up speed. So you very rapidly get back to those childhood years, and the same, client that I may work with that's having issues accepting levels of love underneath what she puts out, like not a certain level of reciprocity. We go back and I ask her to conjure the first time you can remember giving love in a certain way where it wasn't received, appreciated, or reciprocated. And it can be something as small as, I use my most previous client, of course, I'm not saying her name, so it's all good. But it was a simple moment. A lot of times our idea of trauma is like the big stuff, the molestation, the rape, seeing somebody get murdered. With this particular instant, it was a situation where she was young. She had a younger sister, and her younger sister was a baby. She was going off. Her mother was doing something else. She was able to get her younger sister to stop crying. And she was looking to her mom for validation, like, yo, look what I did. Her mother just brushed her off. Most people will perceive a type of moment like this as not trauma. For me, at this point, trauma isn't just the severity of a painful experience. It's the duration of how long we hold on to it without going back to unpack the energy, to be able to sit with the feeling. So a lot of times, if you feel like, well, this is weird, I don't know how to do this, whether it's writing, whether it's recording a song, just find some way, shape, or form to drive your DeLorean backwards and literally spend time with these versions of yourself. When I was writing the other day in the exercise, as I'm writing on each version of myself, I'm closing my eyes. I'm spending time. I'm seeing myself at 5 years old, the suit that I had on, the first time being in front of the church. Memories was coming back. I even forgot about the first time I was in front of an audience was doing a Martin Luther King speech. I've told this story before. In this moment, I'm seeing the color of my suit. I'm seeing my haircut. I'm actually seeing the audience. So if you're not doing this, we talk about wanting somebody else to love us. We'll talk about a lot about, self-love, but are you really taking moments, times, to actually sit with these versions of yourself as if they were completely different people? Because by the time you are this version, they now are completely different people, but still within your psyche that you still have access to. But you got to take the onus to be able to go backwards retroactively and pick them up.
Yeah, and it's like, I love to speak about, dissociative identity disorder,
Right.
and speaking about multiple personality disorder. And I really feel that the only difference is a person who actually has the disorder has been diagnosed. And the average person just has not been diagnosed. But I feel like we all have that. And so what happens is when you experience any type of trauma or overwhelming sensation, the brain, so just to be clear, when you experience trauma, it doesn't always mean that you was locked up in the basement.
Exactly.
Right? Trauma is any stressor, emotional stressor on the mind to where the mind couldn't find a healthy way to cope with the situation.
Which is in the book.
Yes. And so pre-order on my website, candicelove.com. So anything that the mind feels overwhelmed and stressed about, and it doesn't have a solution to that problem. And so what happens when the mind, the brain experience these types of sensations, stressors, or traumas, or what becomes trauma, the brain literally rewires. It does not take the same form as a person that has not experienced any type of overwhelming sensation or trauma. It literally chooses to form a different way. And when it forms a different way, it goes into a different path. When it goes into a different path, a different personality is created, a different persona, a different identity is created, a different character is created. And these are the fragmented aspects of our being that we have to go back and identify and spend time with. So when you spoke about like young Jeff that was the preacher in training, and then I have the many versions of myself that, you know, really thought that I was going to be a singer. And then I also had the versions of myself that held on to not being chosen. When it's time for me to integrate these versions of myself, I have to go back and do visualizations.
Right.
And this looks like identifying who these versions of myself are first. And so what happens with a person who has dissociative identity disorder, they're very clear, like, oh, I have the one that, you know, is the cook, or I have the one that is the mechanic, or I have the version of me that is the artist. There are many versions of people who have multiple identities, and that's because the brain needed different personalities to cope with what they were experiencing in that environment at that specific time. So when it's time for you to now heal or integrate these fragmented versions of your being, you have to acknowledge, which version of me was this when this happened? Who was I at 21 when such and such happened when I was in college? These are different versions of your being. They may even have different names. They will be different ages. They will have completely different personalities. So how you speak to 8-year-old you is not how you'll speak to 16 or 21-year-old you. How 8-year-old you hears what you say is not going to be how 16-year-old you hears what you say. So you're going to have to form a relationship with all of the fragmented versions of your being to where, you know, the only way that I can get through to my 16-year-old self is if I'm the strict parent with her that makes her feel what I'm saying.
Right.
And then maybe the 8-year-old you, the only way you can get through to that version is if you just let 8-year-old you cry. Let 8-year-old you feel like, finally somebody understands what I'm feeling. Finally somebody hears me. Finally somebody's paying me attention and asking me how I feel. Nobody's just walking past me anymore like I'm not here. So you're going to have to identify the different versions of your being, the fragmented versions of your being, and then spend so much time with them, like you said, with your eyes closed. Have those visualizations and have the conversations. What do you need from me right now? What is coming up for you? What are you feeling? What ways have you not been nurtured, acknowledged, seen, heard, wanted, or desired? And asking these versions of yourself these questions allows them to come through and tell you what they specifically need, and not what the 33-year-old you is going to try to heal every part of your being with the same method, because the same method doesn't work. So using writing works. Another thing is visualizations. It's so important, because if you're going back to save fragmented versions of your being, then what would you say to a 8-year-old who was like, oh, I finally get to tell you this person hurt me. This person hurt my feelings and it's still bothering me and it's making me insecure right now. Wouldn't you visualize maybe the 8-year-old version of you sitting next to you and you putting your arm around him or her and telling her, it's okay, like, I'm here now, I hear you, tell me what happened and we'll figure it out together.
Absolutely.
Right? Validating their experience. That's how you go back to these versions of yourself and you rewrite those narratives.
And the version of yourself is built on a belief system. So when we go back in the DeLorean and the client makes it back to the moment where she first felt unappreciated, unseen, unrecognized, unacknowledged, and had that effort she gave not reciprocated by her mother's validation, you can't get rid of your mother. And this is why these parental relationships are so important. But within your psyche, you develop that it's okay for me to not receive the level of love that I give to other people. And that will carry out in various different ways, all the way to the point where you're now 37, 40 years old and you with a man that's not giving you the level of love you receive, that you're giving out. And you're okay with that. You continue to stay and you can't figure out, why do I keep choosing this dude, Docs? Which are we talking about? Are we still talking about that 8-year-old version of yourself that you haven't spent time with, that developed the belief system? It's okay for me to give these levels of love and not get it back. Once you're able to locate the belief system, now you're able to proactively. We go retroactive, and then we proactively come back, and you can see the timeline of habits that have been developed based off that belief system that became that unconscious character in your head, and now what their tendencies are, the habits that they've developed, and now you can rewire everything because now you see the whole game plan. You see what's created. You see the actions it's turned into that are now things that you can't even recognize that you're doing with yourself, to the degree where a client will be like, I can't believe I'm still doing this. Again, which we talking about. And it works on both ends of the spectrum, because of course the hardest life still has beautiful moments. Those got to be recognized, because if you don't spend, and that's what I was just doing with myself the other day, if you don't spend time with those moments, it's almost like, a family picture. We know that moment no longer exists when we look at a family picture, but it's a relic. It's a symbol of what we experience in that particular sliver of reality, right? We don't throw the picture away because we say, well, it's not the moment, it's not valid. It's still a representation. But with these beautiful moments, these beautiful experiences, these triumphs, these accolades, whatever that you have experienced in your life that has been joyful and pleasurable, we'll just have it for that moment and just discard it for the rest of our life. And we starkly remember the negativity as opposed to the beautiful moments. So it's important when nothing is going wrong, per se, to actually also spend time with those pleasurable moments, those moments where you're most proud of yourself, because that keeps that reminder of the cachet you've built, that I'm not just this person where I've had a terrible life. A lot of times when we feel like that is because we're only remembering half of the story. It's so much stuff that we got to give our credence and our attention to, as far as remembering the beautiful stuff too.
And that's why I titled the book, Remember Who the
Exactly.
F You Are, because most of our life is, and everything in society is designed to help us forget.
Exactly.
That's the part that we really don't acknowledge. If you have to wake up, get your kids together, it's not about you.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go to work, that's not about you. You got to make money, that's about you, but in a roundabout way, because you have to pay other people just so you can survive, right? And so majority of everything in society is really designed to help the spirit, the soul, forget who it is on a soul level.
Right.
It's designed to keep the human in this robotic trance.
Exactly.
And so the only way that you can embody your power is when you choose, like, no, I'm going to tap into my power. I'm going to tap into the fullness of my being. I'm going to come out of this trance, and I'm going to remember who I am. I'm going to remember what I've gone through, what I've experienced, what I have, the energy that I've transmuted, what I have overcome, the strength that I have. And when we do this, it gives all of the versions of our being that we're speaking about. Everybody gets to come with us on the journey to healing, growing, and evolve. Yeah, all of the yous. And the other point that you picked up on is what a lot of people will say. They'll say things like, oh, I need somebody to be loyal. I need somebody that's going to show up for me. I need somebody that's going to hold space for me. But then when I ask you to go back and acknowledge your 8-year-old self, you got a huge issue with going back to the past. Right. So why would anybody be loyal to you? You're not even loyal to your own self. Not only are you not loyal to your own self, you don't show up for yourself. You don't send reminders to even the younger versions of yourself that you love yourself. But you want somebody right now to tell you all the time, how come you ain't tell me you love me today? Did you tell you that you love you today? Even the other day I was upstairs working and my husband just yelling from downstairs, babe, do you love yourself? And I'm like, huh? Did you tell yourself you love yourself today?
Facts.
Just having those types of reminders, return back home to yourself. Right. If everything is designed to help you forget, you have to, even if you have to set a reminder on your phone, to return back home to yourself every single day.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of the time when I had just finished There Is No Spoon, 10's my most recent album, which at this point came out like a year and a half, 2 years ago. But at that point, it was a collection of music that had been worked on over a large span of time. So it represented a lot of my growth into what I've become now. So it was important to me. And by the time we finally got it finished and mixed down to the best of our ability, and I was like, yo, I got the album. And it was like 11 o'clock at night. I didn't have Marty this particular night, and he was like, oh, you about to listen to it? And initially I was about to be like, nah, I just do it tomorrow. Like more of a business like approach. Like I was happy it was done. I was excited to put it out. But I was just going to go in the house. I was literally pulling up to my apartment when I received the file. And when you asked me that, I kind of just stopped before I got out the car. I said, you know what? I felt the direct line of communication from the younger version of myself that was looking at the docs who had just got this album back and who was this meditation teacher, all these different things. I can feel him looking at me like, yo, you cool AF, bro. Like, you got a car, you got an apartment that you about to go into, you got a new album that you've been working on this whole time. Can we do what maybe 22-year-old version of you would have did? And what was that? Roll something up. Let's drive around the hood at 11 o'clock at night, smoke one while we listen to this album together.
Yeah.
I think I told you I was doing it, and literally I could feel little homie, Lil Docs in the seat next to me just looking at me like, yo, I want to be like you when I grow up.
Yeah.
And we jamming, bumping this album. Once you do this work, you have that real time, in present moment, direct line of communication. And at that point, you're never alone. You know, you talk about the whole only child thing, but I think it's beyond that. You've done so much work where I see you when we different sections of the house and you talking to yourself, you watching your shows, you going off, you literally having a beautiful time with these previous younger versions of yourself. So you get to this point, all that loneliness and I need some, all that disappears because you got so many of these versions of yourself, this soul polyamory that you have access to that you're not giving your attention to open up.
Facts.
Word.
That I think that was such a beautiful story and explanation of what it looks like to have that version of yourself with you, to integrate that version of yourself.
Right.
And like, even, you know,
Like I'm smiling now thinking about that moment.
Yeah, that's such a huge thing. I forgot all about that.
Right.
But yes, that's what it looks like. Once you've given that or you've reconciled your relationship. And that's another thing that I always speak about. And it is also in the book as well, but how to reconcile these relationships. Because just think about it. If you're in a relationship right now and the person shows up, they texting you 1 minute and then they just go blank.
Right.
Like you haven't heard from them. They don't text you. They don't check on you. And then 20-some years later, they hit you up like, oh, what you doing? And I know the average person to be like, block.
Right.
Or it's going to be like, what you mean what I'm doing? You need to take accountability for how you ghosted me.
Facts.
Right? And so when it's time for us to go back and integrate these versions of our being, we first have to reconcile with the versions of ourselves that we've disempowered, we've ignored, we've exiled, and we've forgotten about, and we've just pushed to the side intentionally because we're trying to make this version of ourselves the best version of ourselves and forget about those past versions. So when you go back to those versions of yourself, you have to reconcile that relationship, which means you have to acknowledge that you have dismissed, dishonored, and disempowered yourself. You have to apologize for the fact that you have not been present for yourself. You have to apologize for the moments where you knew you were disregarding yourself and the moments where you just didn't know any better.
Right.
Wouldn't you want your younger self to be, for someone to show up in your younger self's life and actually take accountability for the fact that they weren't present? So you have to do that. You have to reparent yourself. You have to say, no, I didn't show up for you.
Right.
I knew that you were hurt in this moment. I knew you felt abandoned. I knew you were molested. I knew you felt like you didn't have sovereignty over your body because you were abused. I didn't know how to help you through that. So I thought the only way to help us through was to forget about you and try to move on. You have to give those explanations to yourself so those younger versions of yourself have more clarity and they understand, and there's no lingering residue of questions in the subconscious mind. The average person is probably listening to this like, why do I have to apologize to a younger version of myself?
Right.
The version of me right now don't need that apology. But what's happening is we're not just talking about the version of you right now. We're also talking about the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is always recording.
Right.
It remembers everything, what you ate for breakfast 20 years ago. So it remembers how you felt when you dishonored yourself, when you didn't choose yourself, when you said yes when you really wanted to say no, when you got into a relationship just so you could feel loved as opposed to just loving yourself. the body and the inner child and the younger versions of yourself remember that type of self-betrayal.
Right.
So you have to acknowledge and reconcile and apologize to those versions of your being. And then you start a new relationship. So it's just like a regular relationship. When this person comes into your life and it's like, okay, well, you apologize, you took accountability, and then what? Do you just let them back in? Because now you got trust issues, right? So now it's like, you're going to have to prove yourself to me.
Exactly.
How does a person prove themselves to you? Consistency.
Showing up.
And they show up like how they said they were going to show up. They keep their word. So now you have to show up for yourself. You have to start integrating yourself, and you have to start keeping your word to yourself. I remember when I was healing my womb trauma, and I did a lot of visualizations and a lot of just, healing work with that aspect of my being. But I was a police officer at work, and I'm just rubbing my stomach. And people like, what's wrong with you? You got to use the restroom. And I would just tell them, no, I'm checking in on my womb right now. I'm reminding her that I'm still here. I'm reminding her that after we've reconciled our relationship, that I'm not giving up on her. I'm not abandoning her. I'm not ghosting her. I haven't forgotten about her. I'm checking in with myself to remind myself I'm consistently continuing to show up, and I have not forgotten about you. If that's what you would want someone to do in a relationship with you, you want them to keep showing up, keep keeping their word, you're going to have to do that for these versions of your being that you're trying to integrate. Be there for yourself.
And at that point, like with the example that I use of the album being completed, we aren't potheads. I was a whole pothead for a long time. And at that point where I received the message from him, from Lil Docs, I probably hadn't smoked maybe 3-4 months to that point. And mind you, if we do engage, we taking 2 pulls and we tapping out. Like we got the baby lungs now. I come from being somebody who, like I said before, faced 21 blunts on my 21st birthday. So we talking about a completely different version of myself. But a lot of times when we aren't opening up these channels, we create a hierarchy of the versions of ourselves. So there may be certain aspects of this particular docs that looks down on the 21-year-old that was out here pothead heavy. But when there's integration, there's still a time. There's still a space and a place for him when you finish your album at 40 years old. And it's like, no, today we about to ride around the hood just with ourselves, take our little 2-3 pulls and really enjoy this moment together. And all of us could be here. The meditation teacher don't got to look down on the pothead. The pothead still has his moment. And now he gets to see the meditation teacher that can engage and not be taken over by hitting this blunt a few times. And now I got to just smoke every day. So this is what integration really looks like in real time. And if you're doing this, as you continue to live, the judgments about yourself decrease. Because if everybody is accepted, if everybody gets their chance to play their role when they're supposed to play it, whatever you're going to do today or tomorrow, whatever triumph or failure you're going to have, you're going to understand there's a place for these versions of myself too. Come on, get in the fold. I'm not going to badmouth you. I'm not going to raise you too high up. Everybody is on the same train, so I no longer have to judge myself to the same degree or hold myself to a standard of just pockets of myself when all of it was necessary.
I love that. Yeah.
And with that being said, too, we did want to address, shout out to, the heartthrob right now. Shout out to Jonathan Majors. Shout out to fellow Newark native.
Oh, yeah.
Damn, what's his name?
Michael B.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to fellow Newark native, Michael B. Jordan. You was never corny, bro. Right?
Nah.
But this ties in because we knew we wanted to have this conversation based on her wanting to take me on a date the day she pretty much was finished with the majority of her book, right? She took me on a date night. And it was the day after I had that experience where I was addressing all these different doxes. And Creed 3, we had no intentions of walking into that type of experience. I can't even call that a movie or film. That was an experience, and a lot of it is based on this fight with ourselves. If y'all haven't seen it, I definitely advocate you go check it out, and especially Black men. If you got a husband, you got some sons, you got some uncles, cousins that are having issues prioritizing, processing emotion, and doing some of the type of stuff we talking about, they delve deeply into that in that movie. So Creed 3 is a great representation of what we saying.
Yeah, and I cried the whole ending half of the movie,
Right.
like boo hoo cried. And it was because you now have an artistic visual representation of what the healing experience looked like. And I can't go into everything because of, especially people who haven't seen the movie. But it directly shows how when you do not integrate the fullness of your being, how these other versions of yourself will come and they will sabotage everything that you worked for, that you think you're working for. There is no such thing as being happy if you still have a 8-year-old version of yourself that is still deeply depressed, sad, feels unworthy and insecure. That version of yourself is gonna always show up in your present moment and bleed in your present moment because it still has open wounds. So you cannot experience peace, joy, none of that stuff that y'all trying to get to, the soft life. You can't experience any of those things if you still have versions of your being that are still wounded, that are still looking for someone to come back and save them. If you do not go back, like I said, those wounds will bleed into your present. And then you're like, I got all the money. I got the house. I got the relationship. I got the job. How come I'm still unhappy? And it's because you still have younger versions of yourself that are still crying out for help and you refuse to go back. So that's pretty much what Creed, the movie, looks like. It looks like a person who has everything, but they haven't healed specific wounds. They've ignored intentionally and unconsciously ignored so many parts of their being, and now their past is bleeding into their present.
Yep, and those parts of his being grew into a monster that was hard to even reckon with. So we can make it hard on ourselves if we want. We may think it's hard to cry it out in these moments and this, that, and the third, whatever your technique for the moment may be. But like I always tell people, they say, plant-based is expensive. So it's doctor's notes. A lot more expensive than that kale salad that I'm going to get. So it's a matter of how you want to approach it. If you want to make it hard on yourself, you have sovereignty over your reality to be able to do that. And that's pretty much what we want to finish up at as far as reality, sovereignty. And when you start to do this level of integration work, like I said, it's lucrative, it's abundant, it directs you to your purpose, especially when you cut out the energy of judgment. I ask a lot of my clients, and have done so at events, I ask people, what percentage of your thoughts about yourself would you feel like are negative? And also, what percentage of your thoughts about yourself are doubtful? When you start to eliminate judgment, you're no longer fragmenting your abilities and your limitations into the file cabinets of the judgment about this that came from the moment when you were 7 years old that you haven't confronted yet. There's no judgments to make. You start to realize how expansive the human experience is supposed to be. We love Alan Watts. I know a lot of y'all probably do too. As aware and awakened as he was, alcoholic. And pretty much died of alcoholism, knowing, you know what I mean? Like, this is just a blip of the soul. And the ocean isn't judging the sharks that are grotesquely ripping apart other fish right now. Like, you can't even watch some of that stuff. I'm into a lot of that stuff. The ocean isn't making those judgments. It's just all part of the same thing. So the more these judgments come down, your access to your total awareness, your total energy starts to come online. And this is why people who do become aware in some way, whatever your particular path may be, you start to look lit. You start to look abundant. You start to have a certain magnetism to you. It's not necessarily that you didn't already have that. It's just the walls of judgment that was boxing you in. You including all. Now you got an army. Now you got a brigade of all these different energies that also have certain downloads that even the meditation teacher needs from the 23-year-old pothead. We are able to consistently exchange across the board information. And now it becomes a matter of, well, I'm no longer at the whim of those judgments. I'm no longer at the whim of not having relationships with these versions of myself. And when you don't, you rely on society's layout for what your life should look like based on being a black man from Newark or whatever it is. Now you have the autonomy. You got the freedom to literally create the universe you want from scratch. Nobody else's blueprint. It's all up to your will, your intent, and your karma, your slash action. So with the sovereignty over your reality, that's a big responsibility. One of the main things that I started to realize when I came out of Christianity, now I got to figure out what I believe. I don't have the luxury of having a whole book telling me what's right or wrong. I got to figure this out moment by moment, step by step. Yeah. But if you really want to get to that level of freedom, you have to take on a responsibility of reality, sovereignty. And this is how you get to the point where you know when it's time to write a book, when you know when it's time to put Sasha Flowers down, when to rebrand, when to pick her back up. So just talk a little bit about your relationship with reality, sovereignty. And she popping out here, so you got keys from the master coming right now.
So am I speaking about it like in regards to like my book and Sasha Flowers and that process?
Yep, and your approach to creating.
Yeah, so I don't really know where to go here. It's probably the first time I really don't know like what to say.
Well, I'm watching your process from the outside looking in, and mind you, like I told y'all, go get the book, or we're gonna have some furniture moving. But beyond even just her being the guru that she is, I've had to a certain degree accept taking a backseat to the book being birthed. Right. To Sasha Flowers, she got on a kick where soap was all she was looking at for like 3-4 days. Because what movie was we watching? It wasn't even about soap.
We was watching a cooking movie, and I was like, I want to make soap. We was watching a movie about being a Michelin chef,
yeah.
Michelin star chef, and I was like, no, I'm about to make soap, and I'm going to perfect it.
Right. So, matter of fact, that's a perfect example, because would you say, as we watching a movie, we just enjoying our night, we being entertained, and to a certain degree, when we have our downtime, our movie time, our little children are in that bed with us. Would you say that your inner child being able to have that moment sparked the thought of soap that you're eventually probably going to be making and adding to Sasha Flowers skincare? Is that some of your process? And with that being said, is that why you have to go to such deep levels of tunnel vision when the creation process does present itself to you and what it wants you to do?
Yeah, yeah. When I was watching that movie, I don't know how soap came up, but I was just enthralled with the process of creating. And even now, like the process of creating, I remember when I was younger, my inner child, before I chose I wanted to sing, she wanted to do hair. And she just knew she was going to be a hairstylist. And so I had a doll, a Kenya doll, a black doll. And Kenya dolls had nice hair. So I would go get my mama's like hairspray and stuff. And I would like put it in her hair, rollers in her hair, and style her hair. So I was so focused on styling her hair, and I would go and show my mama, look at the style I created this time. As far as I know, all the styles look just alike. And I don't think you could wash that hair. So it had a lot of like hairspray built up in it. But it was my process of creating, like being really in my creative spirit. And I think right now, like that depths of tunnel vision that I have to go to is really not even a choice. It's almost kind of scary, and it is actually really painful to be in that space, because it's like, even right now, I'm not thinking about what I want to create, but I feel
it's thinking about you.
It's thinking about me, and I feel it in my body, like, and it's like I'm okay with not thinking about it, but it's in my body right now. So even having my laptop next to me feels like I just feel energy, and it's not like it's like being consumed in a way that I'm not used to being consumed. I'm not used to being consumed in that way. And so the sovereignty over my reality is really taking my ability to choose to allow myself to be consumed, because 3 months ago, I chose to allow myself to be consumed by nothing. We both chose
complete inactivity.
And we've spoken about that. I think in one of our first episodes, we spoke about how we were just enjoying life. We were enjoying making love. We were enjoying taking naps in the middle of the day while the sun was on our back. And so we weren't making huge lump sums of money because we were in our resting phase.
Right.
So sovereignty over my reality looks like being in tune with what my reality is calling me to do moment to moment. And it called us to rest in those moments. And now it's calling me to really move in a way that I've honestly never moved with this type of force.
Right.
I've put things in place before. You know, I've been able to move in some energy before, but I've never moved in the way that I'm moving right now. But I'm listening to the energy that I'm being called to answer right now. So it's very interesting because I am being consumed.
and that was perfectly said. You found it, right?
Thank you, baby. Thank you for guiding me
yeah,
to it.
no doubt. But with that being said, being Stedman for this particular juncture, it comes back to the soul polyamory. I'll be getting confused. Yeah, poly, right? Soul poly, I'll call it that. But a lot of us on both sides of the aisle, men and women, we say, I want a person that don't just look good, that don't just make me feel good. I want somebody that's ambitious, that got something going for themselves. If you got somebody that's doing this work, that's in connection with an innumerable amount of versions of themselves that are all sending downloads, right? There's going to be times where you are going to be the seventh wife. And you got to be skillful enough in your own process to know how to be okay with that time where you're not going to see the husband for another 2-3 weeks because his first 3 wives is pregnant or whatever is going on. Can you be okay being that seventh wife? If you're not, then you're not ready for the type of version that your mind is telling you. I want somebody that got $1 million and this is part of what the process takes. It's going to be times where, and it has been times where it's vice versa, where she got to kind of be the seventh wife to the different downloads and blueprints that's coming from the different versions of myself. So a huge part of this process and reality sovereignty, like you said, is that surrender to when it's time to die, to when it's time to create, to understand once that creation comes. The lyric from Mos Def, the song I played for you, he says, when I start to think, and then I sink into the paper like I was ink. When I write and I'm trapped in between the lines, I escape when I finish the rhyme. If you can't let yourself, if you can't let your partner or whoever's in your life be trapped until they need to be to let that thing develop, then you're not ready to be able to create your own reality, to have sovereignty yet. And you probably will be somebody who's going to feel frustrated, but still more comfortable in a cubicle, still more comfortable at that desk and that monthly or bi-weekly paycheck. That's still going to trump your soul's desire for the freedom. And it's going to be that friction. It's going to be that tug of war. It's going to be that fight, just like in Creed 3. But this is why it's so imperative to continue to go to these versions of yourself. This affects that 7 figures you want to make, that business plan you got, the business you want to open. It can't get to that point unless you do this particular work that you say, oh, I don't feel like doing that. That don't make sense to me. That seems stupid. This is what's part of it.
Yeah, and that sovereignty over your reality, it really looks like surrendering to what your spirit is calling you to do right now.
Facts.
Not what you want to do,
Facts.
not what you think is best to do, because even like in the moments of me writing this book, there's time my husband has had to like bring me back to balance of, you make sure you acknowledge your husband when he walks in the room first thing in the morning. You make sure you embrace your husband and then you get back to work, but make sure you acknowledge me because I love you. And normally we spend our mornings together in the bed. And right now I'm up at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning writing. I'm going, to bed at probably 1 in the morning. And so bringing me back to that balance, but still allowing me to answer the call in the moment. And so we have to be so in tune with our spirit where we recognize also, I'm actually not in balance right now. I was coming out of a lot of unbalanced spaces trying to get the bulk of the book written.
Right.
So I needed that moment for you to mention you're answering your call and you are having sovereignty over your reality right now. And there's a balanced way to do it. Not only did he make sure that I remembered to maintain my affection towards him, he also makes sure that I remembered you have to eat today.
To honor your body as well.
You
Yep.
have to eat something with nutrition today. Make sure you drink your juice. As many times I'm writing my book and my husband is bringing me fruit. He's bringing me mango. He's bringing me, what am I eating right now? Grapefruit. He's bringing me fruit because he's recognizing, because I'm really so sovereign over what's happening in my reality right now, there's still other aspects that I'm not really privy to, or I don't really have the capacity to come out of that tunnel and acknowledge.
Right.
And it's affecting me. And so he's making sure he's showing up for me in those ways so I can remain balanced. So I'm answering the call, but I'm also acknowledging that it ain't comfortable.
Right.
At this point, writing this doggone book ain't fun. It ain't fun no more. It was fun at first. It ain't fun no more. Okay, it's work at this point.
Right. Trapped in between the lines.
I'm trapped in between the lines, but I know that this is what I'm being called to do. So when it comes to the job you don't want to be in, when it comes to whatever it is that initially it may start off fun, or maybe it is not. Maybe you just are grateful for an opportunity, but now it doesn't feel like an opportunity anymore, or it's just something that you want to evolve out of. You still have to have that sovereignty over your reality and still keep showing up however you're being called to show up.
And I think this would be the last thing I talk about as far as the sovereignty before we go to our question and wrap up. But as you were saying that, and us being so skilled, so naturally being able to work with ourselves, and when it's your time to be in that trance, when it's my time to be in that trance, a lot of y'all that desire to be in a power couple, you already got power couples within you, but they're locked behind these versions of yourself. Because when both of y'all are flexing in this capacity, now it's no longer a matter of he got to pay all the bills. Now it's no longer a matter of, well, she got more money, she should be taking care of everything. Now it's a matter of we're getting our downloads in real time. So it may be Candace's season to create, to bring in abundance in this particular. We still both doing our thing, but she's in a huge trance right now, things that's going to bring huge dividends when they are able to get out. Being that we both doing this work, when it's my time, she'll be able to clean the house when I come downstairs. I don't got to worry about all that type of stuff because now I'm in my trance. Now it's no longer a matter of duality of roles, what society said. Now we're able to create as a team, as an organization, in ways where nobody has to continuously be at the forefront and steer the ship. And whenever somebody is steering, pick up the pieces, be the seventh wife, make sure the dishes is washed, vacuum. I've been doing all of that. She ain't got to worry about none of that when she's at that computer, because I understand what's going on, and I understand she's going to do that for me when it's my time. So y'all say y'all want that power couple stuff. Again, these are the levels you got to go to. This is what you got to unlock.
Facts. I remember there was an interview I heard Michelle Obama. She pretty much said that exact same thing. She was like, there's times in our relationship to where it's 20-80. To where one person in the relationship is so on go, the other person has to do all the other things and has to show up to maintain the balance of the relationship. And she said it's just that give and take, on and off, on and off. So what you said, I always remember what she said, and what you said is a direct reflection of that teamwork. And that's one thing. We are such a good team. Like, I mean, if y'all can hear the conversations, the meetings where we just like are naturally in flow, naturally. These are not things that we're speaking about either. That doesn't mean that other relationships may not need to have these conversations. But just how we work, these are not things that we have to speak about. It's just our natural teamwork and us acknowledging what the other person needs before the person even has to ask for it. Doesn't mean that there aren't times where someone has to ask for what they need. Like, he had to remind me, you're not being affectionate towards me because you are in so much tunnel vision. That had to remind me to come back home to myself and still be a wife to my husband. But it's the teamwork of acknowledging what each other needs moment to moment.
And in that way, it's not even 80-20. If it's really team, it don't matter who's doing 80, who's doing 20. It's still 100%. Dennis Rodman, no, I got Michael Jordan on my team. All I got to do is go grab 20 rebounds. Still produces the win at the end of the day. All right, so with that being said, we did have a question. We want to start to get back to you guys' questions on the episode. This comes from a client of mine as well, and now a friend via social media. Her name is The Fit Alchemist, LLC. She has her own platform as well. Once again, The Fit Alchemist on Instagram, hit her up. But her question was based on an excerpt from the last one where we was talking about not suppressing anger, but being open to that emotion, to use it when necessary to express yourself. So she asked a question on one of the posts about that. She said, a little off subject, but I would love your feedback. So how do you express anger or model it in a healthy way is the question. That has been coming up for me a lot lately as I homeschool my extremely quick-tempered 8-year-old autistic son. So once again, how do you express anger or model it in a healthy way?
Mm-hmm. And so I would say, now what happens with kids, and this is the thing that many parents don't like to acknowledge, or not, I won't say not like to acknowledge, but sometimes they aren't mindful of the fact that kids' jobs to a large degree are to trigger you so you can go back and heal the parts of your being that you have not acknowledged. So your kids are angels that's like, oh, maybe you should take a look at this today. Oh, you've forgotten about this part of yourself. So when you are acknowledging that your 8-year-old isn't just quick-tempered to be quick-tempered, he's quick-tempered so now he can thrust you into an environment to where you realize, why am I triggered by his behavior? If you know he's an 8-year-old child, he's experiencing the emotions that kids are supposed to experience. On top of that, he's autistic. Why are you triggered by that? So you know off the bat that the reason you're triggered is because he's guiding you into places that your soul needs you to acknowledge. When you acknowledge this healthier perspective, it's not just about anger anymore. Now you have the ability to relax a little in that anger and acknowledge, I can have compassion and gratitude because thank you for helping me acknowledge something that I wasn't aware of. Right? So that's what we spoke about in that last episode, is how his son's mom, initially I was just angry at her. Then I recognized I'm not just angry at her. She's actually helping me acknowledge I'm angry in general. There's a lot of pent up repressed anger that I haven't acknowledged. So that's one. Now I can have a lot more compassion for her behavior because I understand how it's sending me deeper into myself. So that's the other thing. How you express anger in a healthy way. There's so many methods to express anger. If you go on my Instagram and you look, one of the methods my husband gave me is to go outside and scream. That was one of the things that I did. Another method that I did is to hit a pillow. When I'm by myself, I'm in my own time, my own space, and I have to get some aggression out. I just bang a pillow and I say what I need to say and I scream. And you've seen, this is nothing new. These are very old techniques to release anger. But also other ways to get explosive emotion out of the body is to do explosive things.
Absolutely.
Right? To get that energy moving, that stagnant energy out of the body. Some people go to the gym. They ain't going to the gym because they like their body to look good. They're going to the gym because it regulates their emotions. It allows that stagnant energy to surface and it allows it to surface out of the body. You can get deep tissue massages. That's also moving the lymphatic system, which is also moving energy. And when that energy stays in the body, it turns into toxicity. So you're moving it out of the body. Movement. You see a lot of women on social media that go straight towards sensual movement, and they think they're going towards sensual movement so they can be sexy. They're going to sensual movement because they got so much energy in the body. That's just the only way they can figure out a way to do it and feel good in the process. So you can scream. You can go to the gym. You can bang something. Even my husband and I were talking about building. Not that bad. Well, actually, yeah, that too.
With the right person.
With the right person, right. But we were also talking about building our own screen room. Remember, you were gonna build one for me. You can go to like the dollar store, get you some of those crystals, get you a bat, get you some wood. You'll see on movies they actually chop wood,
Right.
and when people get upset, they'll go to wood and they'll get their hatchet and they'll just keep chopping the wood. There's so many things you can do. Even when you chop that wood, you can scream, you can release, you can get it out with every single hit. And so those are the ways that you can healthily express the anger. But in those moments when anger surfaces and you feel it in the body, you gotta have a spiritual practice. And that spiritual practice is gonna be what reminds you to return back home to yourself, to return to the root, whether that's meditation, whether that's just sitting in silence, whether it's crying, whether it's writing, yoga, moving the body. You're going to have to be able to do something right then and there to start regulating that emotion. Breath work. The breath is God. So anything that you do with breath work is going to easily start to move that energy out of the body. You're going to have to play with what modalities work best for you.
Absolutely. And those are methods. Underneath that is just the philosophy of not judging, befriending the anger. And when you somebody's friend, you show up, you give your relationship space and the capacity to be able to exchange. So I was looking up the etymology of the word anger. A lot of times the clues is underneath how we use these words. And they start a certain way, but over time, society after society adds their own spin. And before you know it, it's not correlated to the actual root origin. So I've never even looked this up. The etymology comes from ang, A-N-G-H, painfully constricted, squeeze, narrow. Right? If you got an energy that's experiencing those things, what is it asking for? If it's this narrow squeeze pathway, whatever is in it needs to get through it. So she just gave you pointers for how to do it. But at the end of the day, the main thing that prevents us a lot of times from doing that is we think anger is negative, and it's not. It's a request. It's a check engine light. It's a signal flashing from some of these different energies that, again, may be part of your soul poly that's asking you to move it through a particular point of yourself where it's too squeezed, it's too narrow, it no longer has mobility. It's asking you to move it. And the anger is just the glass bottle carrying a message asking you, get this out of our system.
Yeah, and
She gonna grab it like that? Caught me off guard.
the last thing that I'll say, you're so silly.
Grab mine too. Hey, it's just a mic color. For her, it was the other thing.
The other aspect of anger is it's so healthy.
Absolutely.
That's the part that society like really tries to make us forget is anger is such a healthy emotion. And one of the reasons why I repress so much anger is because I thought that if I wasn't angry that I was a good person.
Right.
And I thought that if I did show up as angry, I would be bad, or I'll be a bad person, or I did something wrong. And so please, y'all, do not allow Instagram to positive vibes you to death.
To turn you into half a being.
Absolutely, because it's not realistic to always be positive. It's not realistic to always be happy. And it's not realistic to always not feel anger.
Right.
And the bottom line is there's a full spectrum of emotion. However, once we start to acknowledge anger, we have to acknowledge that there are many emotions underneath anger that come before anger.
Right.
So what you can do is download the emotional wheel. The emotional wheel has hundreds of emotions and the spectrum of emotions. So, for instance, when I ask a client, how they feel, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm angry. Oh, I'm angry." And I'm like, "Well, are your feelings hurt?" They're like, "No, I'm angry." "Do you feel unworthy?" "No, I'm angry."
Right.
"Do you feel, disregarded?" "No, I'm angry." And what happens is when you get underneath angry, there may be fear, there may be pain, there may be sadness, there may be you feeling like just disregarded, you feeling unworthy, you feeling unprepared. There's so many or out of control, having no control.
Right.
there's so many emotions that come before anger. Anger is the last emotion that you feel. And typically people hold on to anger because it makes them feel powerful in moments that they really feel helpless. Right? They hold on to anger because it makes them feel like they are in control in situations where they really feel like there's absolutely no control, where they don't know what to do, they don't know what to feel, and they're too fearful to allow the vulnerable emotions to tap in. So start looking underneath the anger, because underneath my anger was feeling, let's see, all of the emotions I felt were, I felt weak. I felt weak. I felt as if I felt really vulnerable. I felt soft. I didn't feel weak like in the way society says it. I felt it in a way like I don't want to have to protect myself.
Got you.
I don't want to have to show up against people who are mean to me. I don't want to have to prove myself. I don't want to have to prove that I can go there with you. And when I had to show up in those ways, it would make me really angry, because I knew that when I did show up in that way, that's not who I really was. I was faking like I was strong enough to show up in combative situations. I wasn't, and I'm not. I don't want to show up in combative situations. Those situations actually frighten me. They really scare me, and I don't want to show up and have to protect myself. So when I do protect myself, that makes me feel like really, really weak and vulnerable. So underneath my anger was just the fact that I was too fearful to say that this makes me feel really vulnerable, and I don't know how to protect myself against you without saying that I feel vulnerable. So I'm just going to put on the face and be like, if you can go there, I can go there too.
Right.
There was a lot of lingering emotion underneath my anger that had absolutely nothing to do with anger. It was just the fact that I was not showing up authentically, and I wasn't acknowledging that fear was present.
And when you do show up, now anger doesn't have to manifest as slapping somebody,
Right.
shooting somebody, going to jail, having these intense consequences and repercussions, because you have not befriended anger. So you don't have a certain level of familiarity with it. Like, I watch or sometimes I show you too, the hot chip challenges and all of that.
Yeah.
And you got people out here that literally develop their palate to be able to handle heat. That's what's happening with the anger. When you do befriend it, you're giving it different vehicles and pathways to be able to express itself. So now when it does come, it's not overwhelming to you. You can take the heat, if you will, as opposed to the chip challenge. You can take the heat of the situation and the anger, still feel it. Don't disassociate, but now you got all these other ways, and you've already been processing pieces of it. So when you have a moment that would have normally blew you up, it doesn't have the kerosene, it doesn't have the fuel to draw on to take you to a level where you're going to completely explode. Angry sex. I wasn't angry at you. I wasn't even really angry. I was frustrated at one particular day. I forgot what it was even about. I didn't know we was going to get it in that night. But it happened, and I had a certain energy to me that I may not have been able to bring to you, because I never really been mad at you. We haven't been able to have angry sex. We have great sex, but that vibration, that was different. And you said like, okay. So that's some of the ways that you can start to process these things in ways that's not going to have you end up in jail or murdering somebody. Like when we see those clips online, it's like, yo, how could this happen? It's because that person has not befriended anger for a long time, and it got to a point where it's like, I don't know what to do with this energy or how to get it through this narrow, tightly squeezed path. So I got to pull this trigger.
Yeah. You just gonna have to give yourself permission to allow the emotions to explode, because that's all that's asking to happen.
Explode. Sing it.
When we explode. What's it?
Nah, you good. That's all.
Okay.
TGT.
Shout out to TGT.
What up? All right, so yeah, that's our time. We went way over, but y'all got a lot of nuggets, a lot of jewels. Wrapping up, we got the book.
We have the book. The book will be out March 31st, but you can pre-order the book now. Please pre-order the book now. First of all, I put so much into this doggone book, and everything that I write is what I needed to hear. A
Right.
lot of people think that, you know, when you write something, it's for them.
Mhm.
When you show up on social media, it's for them. When you share your transparency, it's for them. Y'all just get what I'm giving on the back end.
Right.
But this book was written for me.
Mm.
And if I'm a reflection of you, then there's versions of your being that need to hear this as well.
Right.
So the book will be out March 31st. You can pre-order it now. We also have, as of now, one space available in June for our emotional healing retreat in Tulum, Mexico. And then we have a few spaces left in July for our Tulum, Mexico retreat.
SASHA Flowers rebranding.
Yeah, SASHA Flowers. So my skincare line, I'm rebranding it. It's rebranded.
Yeah,
It's done. So now I just need to put the the product in the bottles. And then that's also going to be coming out soon. A lot of y'all are hitting me up about SASHA Flowers. And I just want to make sure like the experience y'all have now moving forward with this product is going to reflect the level of intentionality that I put into the product. So yeah.
And then her creativity has spilled over to me. I had the seed for this book 5 years ago, but she has inspired and motivated me to like really get to it. So Memoirs of a Former F-Boy by your boy is coming soon. Not soon, but it's definitely coming this year. I'm working on it right now. But outside of that, weekly sessions, group guided meditation sessions every week on Sundays. Hit me up for that. We are both accepting clients right now. I do couples therapy, one-on-one counseling. She does one-on-one counseling. I do family therapy as well. And if you're in the Houston area, we're putting it together. But we also going to be working on some community hikes. Our friends dinners, we did our first one last week. It was so beautiful and hilarious and fun, and we just need this. Like a lot of us who probably watch this type of content are creatives. We come together when it's time to do business or get money and that type of stuff. We don't just get to kick back. So Candace has created an avenue for us to be able to do that in the greater Houston area. So if you want to be involved, hit her up, hit me up, and just stay tuned for those details as well.
Absolutely.
That's all we got. Remembering Me, episode 9. Yes.
9.
Love y'all. Share, like, comment, subscribe, rate, all that good stuff.
Yes.
Appreciate y'all for watching these entire episodes because y'all actually are. So
Right.
That's love.
All right. Talk
Peace.
to y'all soon.
Oh, Lord.
What was it at before? 40 minutes?
51.
50. All right. So yeah, right around the last one, about 2 hours.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't think that was going to turn into 2 hours.
Me
I thought we
neither.
was going to have a short one.
I know, me too.
That was good.
That was good. I like to sit back getting comfortable.
Oh yeah, we definitely got to start to incorporate.
We gotta start doing that. Cause it's easier to just talk like this than to just be